On this episode of the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, we're going to unpack some research that suggests that there are three different groups of leaders that engage with camp. Those that are all in, those that are all out, and those that are somewhere in between. We're going to talk about how and why connecting with them in different ways might really matter. Welcome to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast, where we dive deep into theology, research, and practical wisdom for camps, retreat centers, and other key ministry spaces. I'm your host, Jared Rendell, camp enthusiast and part of the Sacred Playgrounds team. This podcast features Dr. Jake Sorensen, a scholar and practitioner who's helping leaders think more deeply about outdoor ministry and the impact it's making. Wander with us what God might have in store at your sacred playground. Hey, welcome to the playground, everyone. Here we are again. Hey, Jake.
Hey, Jared. Good to see you, my friend.
Likewise. So you and I don't live too far apart, right? Like I'm in Minnesota. You're in Wisconsin. Currently in Minnesota, the wind chill is negative 24. Is that about where you're at?
You know, I think we were negative 30 when I woke up this morning.
Awesome.
So I think I got you beat just by a hair.
Like I'm sure we have folks listening from all over the country, right? Because there are camps all over the country, right? We've got some in every state. That's actually a question that I don't know the answer to. Are there some in every state?
Yes,
right?
There are multiple in every state.
In every state.
When we've done the camp director surveys, we often get a response from at least one camp in every state and in Canada as well. So all the provinces of Canada and some of the territories of Canada we hear from. And you know what? We've got listeners in like Australia and New Zealand. So it's summer down there, man.
It's summer. They're not at negative 24. They're not at negative 30. That's right. That's right. We're cozy. We have some good stuff to talk about. So we did one other episode on the Camp and Church Leadership Project, and we're going to break down a little bit of that today is the plan. So can you give us just a reminder about this project? What is CCLP? And then kind of give us a current state of where we are.
Yeah, this is a project that's like really on my mind right now. I just before we started here, I got off a call with a whole bunch of camp directors that were involved with this project in the staff survey portion. Mm-hmm. And so the staff survey that we did was the third phase of the research project, where we actually surveyed summer staff at the beginning of the summer and the end of the summer to measure growth and things like that. But a previous phase of the project, we looked at clergy members, specifically Lutheran clergy members, and we asked them about their summer staff experiences, their other camp experiences, their engagement with camp, things like that. And then prior to that, we had an interview phase where we interviewed people that had previously been on summer camp staff. So really what the project is about and what it focuses on is the summer camp staff experience. And what are the impacts of the summer camp staff experience? What are the main characteristics? What are some of the most important things to have in place in the summer camp experience so that it leads towards growth in leadership, growth in regard for the church, growth in faith, growth in self-confidence, things like that. So how can we better nurture our summer staff communities? And what can we say about the experience of working on summer staff? And so that's kind of the big picture of the project.
Great.
So the clergy survey, it didn't just look at people who had been on staff before. It looked at every single rostered clergy member in the entire evangelical Lutheran Church in America. And so we heard from over 3,000 pastors and deacons.
That's right.
And it's a huge
Great
data
sample.
set.
Mm-hmm.
You know, we talked about this previously a little bit and did sort of an overview on this. But today we're going to focus in on a specific thing. So, I mean, we went into it really looking at, okay, what are the differences between the people who worked on camp staff versus the people who didn't work on camp staff? And there are some great differences there. We talked about that in the previous episode. Mm-hmm. But I want to talk today about sort of the engagement level with camp, because I think this is an important time of year for our summer camps to be connecting with they're congregational ministry partners. And there are different ways we connect based on who the leader of these ministry partners is.
So there we go. That's the hook, right? Like that makes a big difference. I'm excited to break this down. So in case you don't get to make it to the end of this episode, two things that you can do and listen to. One is go listen to the other episode on this. Check out the podcast page, sacredplaygrounds.com/podcast. Check that out. And then two, there's a whole site, and we'll share this link again, but sacredplaygrounds.com/CCLP. That's got all of this info and kind of the overview as well. So I'm excited to break these things down, Jake, because what you just said makes a huge difference, right? Because that helps us actually practically, make choices and make those connections in a way that is intentional and wise based on who they are. So before we dive in, where's the project at currently? What are the things that are happening kind of right now, or what's next?
So we finished the data gathering phase because we just completed the summer staff survey in the summer of 2021. So right now we're starting the rollout of those data. So as I said, I just got off a call with the camp directors that were involved in the project. We had 50 camps that were involved in that project that surveyed their summer staff. And we will very soon be rolling out findings to the larger public.
Awesome. Okay, so we've got multiple surveys. We've got some things that we learned in that clergy survey in particular that we're gonna break down today. And I love when data does this. I love when data goes away from fuzzy, and it takes people like this team, like the Sacred Playgrounds team, to make that mean things. And so what you found about how it broke down into kind of these three different types of leaders and how they engage with camp was really interesting.
Yeah, it's it's one of those findings that is sort of an ancillary finding. It's something that we found in addition to what we were actually looking for. So we were wondering a little bit about clergy level of engagement. So we asked a whole bunch of questions. But then when we were able to categorize them and really see the differences in both experience and in engagement level with camping ministries, it really it opened my eyes a little bit to how we might respond as camp professionals and as church professionals. And so really what we're talking about here is partnership. We've talked about this over and over again about the importance of partnership between camping ministry and congregational ministry. We also talk about partnership with the home. But right now we're talking about these two ministry spaces, camp and congregation. How can we help develop more intentional partnerships between these ministries so that we can impact faith formation in young people, in families, and in the adults that we all care for? And so there are some key ways that we can partner. And there are some ministry leaders that are more enthusiastic partners than others. And so that's what I want to talk about.
So let's do that. Give us, if you would, kind of the overview of these three types, and then we'll spend a little time with each one. Let's start by giving us the however many thousand feet view.
Well, we'll try not to get too high. So just to get your head around how we did this, we looked at engagement level with camps based on a whole bunch of different questions on the survey that the clergy members filled out. And so essentially we're defining people that are enthusiastic about camp. We call them the camp enthusiasts. These are the people that are most engaged. They're most excited. They're the ones that if you're a camp director and you show up in a clergy gathering, they pick you out of the crowd. They come over and talk to you. They want to talk camp. They're excited about camp. They're excited about your ministries. They send people to camp. The way that we identify these people is three aspects. So camp enthusiasts do three things about camp. They speak up about camp. They speak highly of camp. They think that camp matters, and they tell other people that camp matters. Two, they show up. They come to camp. They come to the auction. They come to confirmation camp. They encourage people from their congregation to attend camp, whether that's young people attending summer camp or adults attending retreats or families attending family camp. They encourage these things and they show up themselves. And number three, they put up, in the sense of they give to the camp. These are folks that personally give donations to a local camping ministry, and or they encourage their congregation to do that. And
Sure.
so there's two ways that clergy members can put up for camp. They can give of their personal finances, and they can make sure that it's in the congregational budget to give to the camp, to give scholarship money for campers to go, but also to give direct donations. And so these three things are what the camp enthusiasts do. So if somebody does all three of these, we call them a camp enthusiast. Now, if they do them, not as frequently, like maybe they show up to camp, but it's less than once a year. They don't really give, and they sort of think that camp is important, but maybe not the greatest thing in the world. We call them camp accommodators. And so that's kind of our middle group. So if you got your enthusiasts as the ones that are really your champions about camp, your accommodators are the ones that are like, yeah, camp's great. Camp is good, but they're not going to go out of their way to try to convince somebody else that camp is good. We've all met these folks. And then we've got the third group that we would call camp skeptics. And these are the people that really don't want to be there. They don't show up to camp. They don't give to camp. They don't encourage others to give or to go. And they don't often speak highly of camp. In fact, some of them are going to be detractors. They're not all. Some of them are just like, yeah, I'm not sure that camp is that important. But some of them are, no, camp is all talk. And it's a mile wide and an inch deep, as I heard one pastor tell me before. There's not really a lot going on there. They don't matter. Sometimes you'll hear things like that. It's better off if camp just closes. It's an old model of ministry. Those sorts of things are what you get from camp skeptics.
Sure.
But they're not all hostile. Some of them are, but not all of them.
Sure.
Those are our three kind of categories that I want to talk about and look at.
Those are the buckets. And we've got, when we start to break down, you'll share, but we've got numbers from this survey that, in the big bucket, there were about, this percent of each and about this percent of each, which, like you said, makes a difference both in knowing the landscape, but then especially for these leaders that are listening, through the learning about who those are, they can sort of identify, the folks that they're going to come.
Absolutely. So, so when we look at the percentages, what we're talking about here, we're talking about across the entire ELCA.
Yeah.
So it's going to be different in the United Methodist Church, in the Episcopal Church, in evangelical congregations, things like that. And so there's going to be different percentages across the different denominations and faith traditions. So I want to focus on kind of the types, but to look at the percentages that we have in the ELCA across the entire church in the country, 39% of rostered ministers, that's pastors and deacons, are camp enthusiasts. In the middle, 43% are camp accommodators, and 18% are categorized as camp skeptics. Now, that's across the whole church. It varies based on region of the country, and it varies based on synod in the ELCA. So it's going to be the same in these other churches, that based on the judicatory of the church, the different regions of the country and the specific judicatories, whether there's a camp there or not, you're going to have different percentages of enthusiasts, accommodators, and skeptics. So these numbers are not going to be across the board for everybody. So I think the key is to work to identify who these different groups are. And so you're going to know your local clergy members and the ones that are highly supportive of camp, the ones that are your enthusiasts. You want to identify those people. And you want to also know who are the accommodators and the skeptics. Does that make sense?
Yep, that makes sense. And it's helpful to hear that. And a couple of those caveats too. But I love that actually the key is sort of, it almost becomes a tool for these connections that, like you said, matter right now. So let's do it. Let's spend some time breaking down each of these, say a little bit more, a little bit more about them and help these camp leaders connect with them, engage with them, maximize these connections with them for the good of everybody. Where do you want to start?
I want to start at the top because the enthusiasts are the people that you should always be starting with. Those are your champions.
Sure.
So you need to know who these folks are. You probably already do because those are the people that show up at your camp. what I want, a couple things. One, don't take them for granted. They're enthusiasts because of the experiences that they've had. These are people, most of them work campers. Many of them worked on summer camp staff. They've had positive experiences there personally. They've seen positive experiences in their congregation members. Giving them attention really helps. Making them feel heard really helps because it keeps them connected. It keeps them in the enthusiast category rather than dropping them to the accommodator category. Mm-hmm. So making sure that we spend a ton of our time with our camp enthusiasts really matters. Let them know what's going on. Ask for their input on different things that you're thinking about in terms of programmatically, in terms of strategic direction of the camp. Mm-hmm. You need to nurture these people because we might say enthusiasts aren't born that way. It doesn't just happen by accident. Right. Again, they've had these incredibly influential experiences in their personal life, or they've seen the power of camp in the lives of others. And so we need to cultivate their enthusiasm and connect with them. They're also our champions. Again, these are the ones that are going to give financially to the camp. They're the ones that are going to show up at your events and bring people to their events. And they're the ones that are going to speak highly of your camp to their colleagues. So when you're not there to shout about how great camp is, your enthusiasts are the ones defending your ministries. And so we need to equip them to do so. And the way we equip them is with knowledge. Knowledge about how our camp is doing, knowledge about the ministries that are going on there, knowledge about the opportunities to engage, things like that, so they can tell their colleagues. These are the folks that are going to help bring the accommodators into the enthusiast category. They're going to invite other people to camp. And so these are the people that are most important to connect with. The other thing is, and we just talked about this on the call that I was on with these camp directors, because right now in January, it's recruiting season. People are looking for summer camp staff. Mm-hmm. And one of the big findings from the summer staff survey was that we need to hire people of faith. And it's difficult to find people of faith, especially during this pandemic, because they're not necessarily engaged with congregational ministries or campus ministries as much as they might have been in the past. Mm-hmm. So one of the pastors that was on the call said, "Why don't you call me?" This person was a camp enthusiast and said, "In 13 years of ministry, I've been called once for referrals about summer camp staff."
Wow.
This is a camp enthusiast. Somebody who goes to camp all the time, speaks well of camp, sends kids to camp, makes sure that the congregation gives to camp, gives personally to camp, all these things. Been asked once
one call
for referrals. And said out loud to this group, "Hey, if you call me, I'll give you 4 names."
Everybody's jotting down.
Exactly.
Add the number to the chat.
Exactly.
It's not that's so interesting, right? Because it's no secret from take your pick, business or whatever, that like relationship-based marketing, relationship-based recruiting, they know this. They know that so much better than a cold walk through a college, ministry fair, if even that. Yeah, of course do this relationally.
It makes so much sense, right? And are we connecting with our ministry partners? Are we identifying them? And so what I'm hoping that these categories do is it helps all of our camp directors in a very simple way identify their people.
Sure.
Okay, there's a new pastor at this congregation. Are they an enthusiast, an accommodator, or a skeptic?
Yep.
You can even jot notes next to your list of clergy members.
Yeah, I've got a little note here to as we go for some of the ways that they might do that, right? Because we're using systems, different kinds of systems for doing this, and we got to build that in. We got to start building that into our databases, to our plans for who we're connecting with. The other thing this is helpful for this mindset change of, because sometimes literally the opposite is what feels like it makes sense. Oh, they already love camp. I don't need to worry about them, right? Like they already love it. I need to get all the people who don't really love it yet
to step up on that ladder. That feels sometimes like the most natural thing. But that's the same idea as, if you've done kind of like Strengths Finder or things like that, the idea that you focus on the stuff that you're the best at rather than constantly just try to fix what's broken. Of course, we want to connect with all of them in some way, but taking care of your strongest links, your strongest connections, and then, to your point, using them to be the bridge. Gosh, that makes a lot of sense.
I'm glad it makes sense to you, and I hope it makes sense to our listeners as well. So here's a couple of statistics that hopefully help paint the picture here. Camp enthusiasts, in comparison to all of the other clergy members that responded to the survey, they are over 3 times more likely to require their confirmation students to attend camp, and over 3 times more likely to host traveling day camp in their congregation. They are over 4 times more likely to have adult members regularly attend camp programs. They are 5 times more likely to sponsor their children and youth to attend camp, and they're over 6 times more likely to give an annual financial contribution to their local camp. I mean, these are things that are directly beneficial to your camp, and to your point, they don't happen by accident. And you can't take this for granted. If you let them know about the opportunities to connect, they will tell their people. They will tell their adults to attend your retreat. They will encourage their young people to attend your summer camp programs, and they will encourage giving. These are the ones that you should be spending your most time with. Absolutely.
Yeah. We got a little enthusiastic about the enthusiasts.
We should get enthusiastic. I mean, these are the people that you see on the street and you go and you give a big hug to. They're your champions.
Yeah. Yeah. On multiple
Keep them
levels.
informed. I've seen camp directors come in and not nurture these relationships. And then I've seen camp enthusiasts be confused. People that love camp and love that particular camp and just be like, I don't know what to do because I don't feel included. Plug them in.
Yeah.
Invite them to be on the board, invite them to be on a committee, invite them to camp, invite them to just be there. Give them a cabin. Let them take a retreat there, things like that. Your enthusiasts are the ones that you want to spend the most time with.
All right, there's one. Let's take a quick break. We'll come back and talk accommodators and skeptics. We'll be right back.
Do you like what you're hearing? Go deeper into the research and best practices of Christian camping with Sacred Playgrounds, the book. This brand new resource is Jake's most comprehensive contribution to the field of outdoor ministry. It is loaded with stories and research from Christian camps across the country and around the world. It traces the history and theology of outdoor ministry, focusing on the 5 fundamental characteristics of Christian summer camp. This is the premier resource for Christian camp professionals, church leaders, camper parents, and all those passionate about camping ministry. Order Sacred Playgrounds wherever you get your books.
All right, welcome back, everyone. We just talked about kind of our overview of the 3 types. We have covered our enthusiasts, and we've got 2 more types to talk about. What do you want to do next, Jake?
Let's go accommodators. That's our middle category. And I don't want to make them sound wishy-washy, but they really are defined by not being enthusiasts and not being skeptics. They're a middle category. They just are. But they don't have to be. And that's what I want to emphasize here. So like when we think of these, so again, it's 43% of the roster ministers in the ELCA, but this is going to vary by the different denominations, the different areas of the country, things like that. This group, they recognize the importance of camps and retreat centers to the life and the ministry of the church, but they generally do not go out of their way to support the camp. That's what we might say about these folks. So they're like the enthusiasts in that if you ask them about camp being an old model of ministry, they'll disagree with that overwhelmingly. They say, no, camp is valuable. but they tend to visit the camp only occasionally or rarely, and they're far less likely to volunteer, and only a few of them might give to camp financially. But the thing to remember is, while they're not like enthusiasts, they're not detractors either. 90% of them agreed that their local camp director is a well-respected partner in ministry. And very few think it's time for their camp to close or anything like that. So these are the folks that they operate in this middle ground, right?
Mm-hmm.
They're not overly enthusiastic, but they know that camp is important. Camp fits into the mix somewhere, but you know what? They might not have time to devote a bunch of their resources to the camping ministry because they're doing a bunch of other things.
Mm-hmm.
Their mind is elsewhere. If you ask them, oh yeah, camp's great, what do you need me to do? They'll be willing to help out.
Sure.
But the enthusiasts are going to go out of their way to help out. They'll come to you and say, what can I do?
Yeah.
The accommodators, if you show up, they'll say, hey, you're a partner in ministry. Great. But you're a partner in ministry like so many other different partners in ministry. You're kind of on that same level as these other partners in ministry. So that's a way to mentally understand who you are in relation to the accommodators.
Yeah.
They want to be your partner. They're glad that you are their partner. Okay, now what can you do for me?
Mm-hmm.
That'll be more of a question that they're going to ask.
Yeah, that makes
Does that make sense?
Yeah, it feels like this group is categorized by a couple things. Priority, like where they're placing priority. Whether like you said, they're either they've got so many other things going on and they absolutely feel like they have to place priority on those things, or it's specifically their job to place priority on things. So it's going to take something intentional, something maybe experiential and relational to start to put camp as a little higher priority than they maybe are right now. But the other thing I heard you definitely say is another P word: potential. This is also a group that has potential to start to lean into an enthusiast if they can see and maybe even more feel value out of that experience and something with camp ministry that serves their purpose as well.
Absolutely. Some of these folks can become enthusiasts, but I don't want you to focus your resources on trying to turn your camp accommodators into enthusiasts. Work with your camp enthusiasts and understand when somebody is an accommodator and understand that there are reasons that somebody's an accommodator. And it might have to do with time and prioritization and things like that. You think that your camp is the best ministry, the most important ministry in the world. These people don't disagree that your ministry is valuable, but they're going to take it possibly in a negative way if you come at them too strongly and say, why aren't you sending your kids to camp? Why aren't you doing confirmation camp anymore? Why aren't you promoting camp to your people? This is a responsibility that you have. You have to support us. Sometimes camp directors come at people that way, even if they're not saying those words. They come across in the sense of, you need us. We're your camp. We're the most valuable thing in this place. And camp accommodators are like, you're important, but you're thinking a little too highly of yourself. We're important too. So one of the ways to approach camp accommodators is to offer them something rather than ask for something. How can we support you? How can I help make your ministry better? They see you as a partner in ministry. They want to be your partner, but it's a give and take relationship. They're not going to be willing to give more than you give to them. And so our role as camps is oftentimes to serve the church and to serve our congregations. How can you creatively serve your accommodators? And if you don't have a specific way that you can do that, then don't show up at their office and ask for something. Because you're only going to get a few of those times. And then they're going to become, you know what? I don't need this right now. You can easily get this group into the skeptic category as well.
Sure.
Remember, they can go either way.
They can.
So knowing who they are, knowing who your enthusiasts are, and knowing your accommodators, and knowing the difference and approaching them differently is going to be important.
You've already talked even about some of those offerings that they could be, because the assumption is, of course, camp is an offering, like a camp experience. But retreat for that pastor or their staff. That sounds interesting. We talked about this in the last episode, the New Year's episode, being a resource to them, like being a resource to these ministry partners, right? So you're creating a service, creating their Camp Sunday form and sending it to them in video format or whatever it might be. They're all of these offerings. But if we come in with that, looking for ways to help mindset, it seems like that'll make a big difference with this group.
Absolutely. So don't go into their office and say, I need you to send kids to camp, or I need your congregation to donate, or I want you to be on the board. Those are things to bring to your enthusiasts.
Yeah.
Bring to your accommodators. What can you offer them in terms of ministry spaces, and value to their ministry? You're a supportive ministry for them, and they know that. But don't overthink your importance in the life of the church. Camp is important. I believe that. I believe that. You believe that. We're camp enthusiasts, right?
Right.
And we understand that camp is one ministry among many that are really important in the cultivation of faith formation. And so keep that in mind when you're approaching accommodators.
Yeah, that makes sense.
And know that your enthusiasts are the ones that are going to make enthusiasts out of your accommodators.
That's the angle, right? Yeah, roundabout, but it's a really relational roundabout that will bring them closer than a transactional kind of thing. Yeah, that's smart. So like we talked about with the enthusiasts, what we want to do is we want to find some ways to identify them, right? So, we likely know these folks, or at the very least, other staff members or board members or whoever know these folks. We can see by how often is their church come to camp or whatever else it might be.
Are they giving personally? You can see that. You've got your giving list.
Mm-hmm.
You've got the congregational giving list. You've got how many kids come to camp. You've got, do they do adult retreats or church council retreats at your camp? You got all those data points.
Yeah. So we identify this bucket and we find some ways to help them. All right. So that is group number 2, our accommodators. We've got one left.
The skeptics. The skeptics, again, this is the smallest group, at least in the Lutheran church across the country. Mm-hmm. However, it's larger in certain areas, right? So you need to know who your skeptics are and how many there are. Because when the skeptics outnumber the enthusiasts, that changes the conversation at clergy gathering. If you're not there, mm-hmm. Camp comes up. How is it being talked about? It might be talked about in a negative way. There are too many skeptics around. But here's the thing about skeptics. You're not going to convince them. They're skeptical about camp. They might even think that your camp should close. Mm-hmm. They might say, yeah, maybe camp has a role. But they probably don't think it's that important. They probably haven't experienced it personally in terms of transformational. And remember this, they might have had a negative experience at camp. In fact, they probably did.
They probably
either
did.
Personally,
yep, good point,
or one of their members of the congregation had a negative experience at camp and it wasn't handled appropriately, at least mm-hmm. in their mind, right? Sometimes that's all it takes.
Mm-hmm.
One of the camps that I've worked with over the years, there was an incident during the summer where one of the young campers, she was in middle school, was getting on the nerves of a summer staff member. And he turned away and mumbled under his breath, stupid little. She heard him, told her father, who happened to be a pastor. The situation was not handled in a way that the pastor felt was appropriate. And that congregation quickly turned from a very supportive congregation to a not very supportive congregation. Mm-hmm. And an incident like that might be why somebody's a skeptic. So there are sometimes damage control that we can do. But for the most part, people are skeptics for a reason, and you're not going to convince them. So what I'm trying to emphasize is don't spend all your time hanging out with the skeptics and trying to convince them. The key ways that you can work to bring the skeptics from the skeptical category into the accommodators category, cold hard facts.
Yeah.
Like all the stories that you tell are not going to outweigh the stories that they already have about what they think is negative about camp or what they experience negatively about camp. The cold, hard facts can sometimes bring people around, but you need to put those out there and not try to, like, you shouldn't show up in their office and say, see, camp is really awesome. Look at the data that we have from Sacred Playgrounds. Like, you're not going to convince them. Slowly over time, there might be influencers in their lives that will convince them. And these are going to be their clergy colleagues who are enthusiasts, who are sitting with them and saying, well, I had a different experience at camp, or I think camp is awesome.
Right.
You know, I mean, the people that they respect and love, those are the ones that might bring them around. But you as a camp director, I mean, if you show up with your handout to these skeptics, they're just going to get more skeptical about your ministry. And they're going to get frustrated, and they're going to tell somebody else, you know what that jerk director Jared did is he did this. He came and he wants money. That's all he wants whenever he shows up. He thinks that camp is the greatest thing in the world, when in reality, it might be time for that camp to close. I mean, then that opinion is what's talked about out there.
Right.
So don't spend too much time with your skeptics. Know who they are. And you can work with some of the colleagues to change the perceptions in your area.
Yeah.
But really working with your enthusiasts and figuring out strategies to do this is going to be your best bet.
Yeah. Yeah. Be you and tell your stories, right? Those facts and those stories of, and especially ones that don't just come from you. You know, getting those stories out there is great marketing in general, but can maybe speak to some of those skeptics in a different way than, like you said, you come into an office and begging or arguing or whatever it is across the table there.
Or just sending out a random letter. I mean, think of it this way. Right. Sometimes we send out communications to our pastors and we're just saying, I'm sending it out to the pastors. Well, read it, and read it from the perspective of an enthusiast, an accommodator, and a skeptic. How are they going to interpret it? You might need to send out different communications to your different pastors based on if they're an enthusiast, accommodator, or skeptic.
Yeah.
And just know that.
That's interesting.
So I think it can really change the way that we interact with our constituent congregations and understand who our partners are.
That's helpful. That's a helpful overview. There is, of course, more to say. There's even some more stats and things like that, folks. So here's what you do. Here's your two steps from here. Number one, learn a little more. And there are a couple ways to do that. If you head to sacredplaygrounds.org/CCLP, you're going to find a couple things. One, you're going to find the quick facts sheet that is just a quick download from the clergy survey. And that's got these numbers kind of embedded in the rest of that info so you can see it in context. And then two, Jake put up a post on each of these groups, and he's talked about some of that right now, but there's some more details in there and some more of the stats and data and stuff in there. You can find those articles there, right off of that page. They're embedded right in there. So learn some more. That's one thing to go do, is learn a little bit more about these groups. And two, like we've been talking about, it's time to try to identify them. All right. So however you do this, however that you systematize connecting with your pastors. Maybe you've got a big spreadsheet. Maybe it's hanging out in your kind of like camp management database, whatever it is. Almost all of those have a way to kind of tag things or group things together. And so that's a task that would be an interesting both kind of conversation point for you or your staff, and maybe even your board, to say, let's do this together. Let's talk about these groups and engage these groups intentionally, but we got to tag and group them. So that's the other step to take right now. And do that soon, because to your point, Jake, this is the time that we're connecting with them. We're looking for staff right now, and pretty soon, lots of registrations are open, but we're also going to be starting to do some of these visits and saying, hey, we want to increase our numbers here. We want more to come to camp, and we got to speak to those leaders in different ways. So those are your takeaways, folks. Those are two things to do: learn some more and get those groups tagged together. Thanks, Jake. Thanks, everyone. We'll see you next time on the Sacred Playgrounds podcast.
Thanks for listening to the Sacred Playgrounds podcast. This episode was produced by me, Jared Rendell, and featured Dr. Jake Sorensen, lead researcher and founder at Sacred Playgrounds, LLC. Our theme music is Taylor Wilson. You can find his original songs wherever you get your music. Learn more and connect with the Sacred Playgrounds team at sacredplaygrounds.com.